This audiobook is your initiation into the awaiting timeline key, revealing how the 33rd degree shift allows you to enter the life that has been patiently waiting for you. You'll soon discover that your desires are echoes from the timeline where they already exist. You were expected. Step through the doorway into your prepared destiny. The awaiting timeline key. You didn't arrive here by accident. Certain pages find certain souls. If this book found you, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm giving away a free physical copy of this book, packed with ancient wisdom and timeless insight. The details are in the pinned comment, so don't forget to check it out. Introduction. Here's the prologue. Following the precise instructions, you are standing at the threshold of a profound understanding that will fundamentally transform how you perceive personal transformation. This is not another self-help manual, but a sacred transmission about the law of arrival, a principle far deeper than traditional manifestation teachings. The universe does not respond to your words. It responds to your state of being. Your inner landscape, composed of quiet beliefs, unspoken assumptions, and vibrational frequencies, is constantly broadcasting a signal that determines what can and cannot enter your experience. This is not mystical theory, but a precise energetic mechanism. Imagine your consciousness as a sophisticated receiver, constantly scanning and selecting realities. Your current state doesn't just attract experiences, it determines which experiences are even permitted to cross into your lived reality. Some affirmations fail not because they lack power, but because they contradict your fundamental inner configuration. This book is your personal manual for recalibrating that inner system. You will learn how readiness is not a passive waiting, but an active, intentional state of being. Each chapter will reveal how your identity, not your desires, ultimately shapes your world. Through a blend of psychological insights and timeless wisdom, you'll understand the subtle mechanics of transformation. What you are about to explore is both a science and an art, the precise inner technology of manifestation. You will move from being a spectator of your life to becoming the deliberate architect of your reality. The practices shared here are not theoretical concepts, but practical initiations that will rewire your relationship with possibility itself. Your journey begins now, not with hoping, but with becoming. Part 1. The First Glimmer. Chapter. The Book That Finds You. Nora's fingers hovered over her phone, scrolling mindlessly through another workday afternoon. The office felt suffocating, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on her cubicle. For weeks, something strange had been happening. An audiobook title kept appearing everywhere. First, it was a pop-up ad she barely noticed. Then her colleague Marcus mentioned it during a coffee break. Last weekend, while browsing a dusty thrift store, the audiobook sat prominently in a bin of discarded media, its cover seemingly looking directly at her. Each appearance felt less like coincidence and more like a persistent whisper. Something inside her recognized a pattern. These weren't random encounters, but carefully orchestrated moments of invitation. Across town, Hank Miller sat in his modest living room, surrounded by years of accumulated self-help materials. A thick binder from a program he'd purchased years ago collected dust on his bookshelf. He'd always intended to start, always found a reason to delay. The health report from his recent medical checkup changed everything. As he read the doctor's recommendations about stress and lifestyle, his eyes drifted to that forgotten program. What he had been avoiding was now impossible to ignore. The universe communicates through intricate systems, not through dramatic signs, but through subtle, persistent nudges. Recommendations, conversations, seemingly random encounters are actually precisely calibrated delivery mechanisms. Each invitation carries an energetic signature, waiting for the moment of readiness. These are not accidents. They are responses to the quiet signals constantly broadcast by one's inner landscape. The questions muttered in frustration, the silent prayers, the unspoken yearnings, all create vibrational requests that the universe meticulously answers. Ignoring these invitations doesn't cancel them. They simply wait, patient and persistent, until the moment of receptivity arrives. Practice. Trace the chain of events that brought this book into your hands. Write down at least 3 turning points that led you here. Then declare in writing, "I am willing to recognize this as an arrival I asked for." Chapter 2. The Law of Arrival. Calvin Rodriguez stood in his immaculate home office, watching the sunset paint golden streaks across the pristine windows. For years, he had approached real estate like a battlefield. Every interaction a potential conquest, every moment an opportunity to hustle. Networking events consumed his evenings. His phone became an extension of his hand, constantly pinging with messages, emails, and potential leads. Yet something curious had begun to reveal itself. The days when Calvin stopped fighting and simply existed, when he organized his workspace, spent time preparing a thoughtful meal, or took a quiet walk, those were the days unexpected opportunities materialized. Clients would call with surprising offers. Contracts would land without the aggressive pursuit he had once believed was necessary. His colleague Maria had noticed the shift. "You seem different," she remarked one afternoon. "Less desperate, more present." What Calvin was experiencing was more than luck. It was the subtle mechanics of arrival, a principle far deeper than traditional goal-setting or motivation. The universe responds not to desperate chasing, but to an internal state of quiet confidence. Meanwhile, across town, Alice Martinez was transforming her relationship with work and time. As a nurse working grueling shifts, she had long complained about her overwhelming schedule. But instead of begging for change, she began living as though more spaciousness was already her reality. She started small. Alice established clear evening boundaries. She scheduled time for reading, meditation, and personal care, as if these were non-negotiable appointments. Her mindset shifted from scarcity to abundance, treating her time as a precious resource, already under her control. Gradually, her external world began to realign. Scheduling at the hospital became more accommodating. Colleagues started respecting her boundaries. Opportunities for more balanced shifts emerged, not through confrontation, but through her changed internal landscape. Practice. Select one desire you have been actively chasing. Reflect deeply. How would a person for whom this reality just arrives think and behave this week? Write down 3 specific behaviors that someone who naturally embodies this desire would demonstrate. Then, choose one of these behaviors and implement it immediately. This is not about forcing an outcome, but about becoming the energetic match for what you seek. Embody arrival. Don't chase it. Chapter 3. Thresholds. Marion Harris stood behind the restaurant counter, her hands trembling slightly, as her manager, Greg, extended the promotion offer once more. The shift supervisor position dangled before her like a golden opportunity, yet something deep inside her pulled back. Her co-workers' potential judgment, their whispers, their sideways glances, felt more suffocating than the promise of advancement. This wasn't the first time. For 3 consecutive years, Marion had been offered the same opportunity, and each time she found a way to retreat. Her life had become a circular path, returning to the same starting point, with new doors appearing and closing before she could step through. At 32, Marian understood her pattern, but felt powerless to break it. The threshold between her current reality and a potentially transformed professional life remained uncrossed, not because opportunities were absent, but because her internal narrative kept her rooted in familiar uncertainty. Across town, Lester Ramirez experienced a similar dance with possibility. As a freelance graphic designer, he had developed an intricate ritual of self-sabotage. He would meticulously craft design proposals, spend hours perfecting every detail, and then, just moments before hitting send, he would hesitate. His computer screen would display carefully constructed presentations representing hours of work, yet his finger would hover uncertainly over the keyboard. Doubt would whisper its persistent questions. What if they reject me? What if I'm not good enough? What if this exposes my inadequacies? The result was predictable. Clients never saw his work. Opportunities slipped away. His external professional landscape reflected his internal hesitation, a mirror of retreat positioned precisely at the threshold of visibility. Both Marian and Lester demonstrated a profound universal principle. Thresholds are not just physical doorways, but charged moments of potential transformation. They are intersections where two versions of oneself stand side by side, one rooted in the familiar, the other reaching toward possibility. These moments of choice, whether in a conversation, an application, a decision about career or personal growth, quietly select the reality one will inhabit next. The choice is not made through grand gestures, but through subtle internal alignments. Practice. Identify 3 recurring edges in your life, areas where you consistently encounter moments of potential transformation, in love, work, or health. For each threshold, describe the 2 worlds on either side. Then, write a single, powerful sentence for each threshold that declares which world you now choose. This becomes your commitment, ensuring that when these doors appear again, you already know how you will walk through. Chapter 4. Readiness as Vibration. Ethel Martinez arrived at the coffee shop each morning, carrying more than her apron and name tag. She carried an invisible atmosphere, a subtle energy that seemed to precede her actual physical presence. On mornings when soft jazz played through the cafe speakers, and she had taken extra care with her appearance, a crisp white blouse, carefully applied makeup, a sense of quiet anticipation, something remarkable happened. Customers lingered longer. Conversations flowed more easily. Tips appeared more generously in her jar. Conversely, on days when exhaustion dragged her shoulders down and her internal dialogue whispered complaints, the entire cafe seemed to contract. Customers became brusque. Interactions felt transactional and cold. The very air seemed to reflect her unexpressed frustration. Across town, Warren Peterson discovered a similar phenomenon. After losing his wife of 42 years, he had retreated into a world of quiet grief. But something shifted when he began his evening walks, deliberately changing his internal narrative. Each evening, as streetlights flickered on and neighborhood sounds settled into a gentle rhythm, Warren would walk with purpose. His steps carried a new intention. Silently, almost like a prayer, he would affirm, "I am someone life is kind to." Initially, the words felt awkward, almost like an ill-fitting sweater. But with repetition, they began to reshape his internal landscape. Neighbors who had previously offered only perfunctory waves now stopped to chat. Unexpected invitations arrived. a book club meeting, a community garden volunteer opportunity, a local photography class. The universe, it seemed, was responding to Warren's refined frequency. Not through dramatic intervention, but through a subtle recalibration of possibility. These stories illuminated a profound truth. Readiness was not a passive state, but an active vibration composed of multiple elements: self-talk, emotional baseline, physical posture, and unspoken assumptions combined to create a broadcasting signal that the world continuously received and responded to. Practice. Choose one area of your life where you feel stuck or uncertain. Rate your current vibration of readiness in this area from 1 to 10. Then, intentionally shift your breathing, posture, and inner dialogue for 5 minutes. Breathe deeply. Straighten your spine. Silently affirm a statement of openness and possibility specific to this area. Notice how changing your inner tone immediately alters your body's response and mood. Chapter 5. Inner Permission. Dottie Stevens stood behind her salon station, her hands expertly wielding scissors that moved with the precision of an artist. For years, she had been the quiet genius of her local hairstyling community. A stylist whose waiting list grew longer each month, whose clients spoke about her in reverential tones. Yet something peculiar happened consistently. When high-profile clients requested her specifically, she would subtly redirect them. "Maria is fantastic," she'd say, gesturing to her colleague. "She'd be perfect for what you're looking for." Her colleagues noticed. Her clients sensed it. There was an invisible barrier Dottie had constructed, a self-imposed limitation that whispered she wasn't quite worthy of the success, constantly knocking at her door. In the back office, Frank Rodriguez was experiencing a similar internal struggle. His auto repair shop had been a neighborhood fixture for decades, but he had always operated from a place of apologetic survival. His waiting room looked tired. Mismatched chairs, outdated magazines, a sense of functional mediocrity that seemed to say, "I'm just happy to be here." Something shifted when Frank realized he was broadcasting a message of minimal worth. He invested in new furniture. He raised his prices. More importantly, he stopped apologizing for his expertise. The law of arrival revealed itself not through grand gestures, but through these quiet, internal negotiations. Permission was the silent currency of transformation. Family histories, cultural conditioning, inherited beliefs about scarcity. These were the true gatekeepers of potential. Dottie and Frank represented a universal human pattern, the tendency to create invisible ceilings that prevented full arrival. Their stories demonstrated how deeply ingrained self-limitation could be, how a person could simultaneously desire success and unconsciously repel it. The core teaching emerged. External abundance could not override a deep internal no. Vision boards, affirmations, strategic planning. These were meaningless if the fundamental inner dialogue rejected worthiness. Practice. Take a blank piece of paper. At the top, write, "From this moment, I allow myself to." Complete the statement focusing on one specific area of your life where you felt restricted. Be precise. Be bold. Then sign the document with your full name, treating it as an official decree. Date it. Acknowledge yourself as both the authority and the recipient of this permission. This is not merely an exercise. This is a binding contract with yourself. Chapter 6. The Realm of Assumption. Hazel Miller's hands trembled slightly each time her phone rang. The rectangular device seemed to pulse with potential disaster, a harbinger of impending doom that sat quietly on her desk. As a meticulous bookkeeper, she had developed a peculiar relationship with communication, anticipating the worst with a precision that matched her numerical calculations. When the phone chirped that Tuesday morning, Hazel's shoulders instinctively tensed. Her mind raced through potential catastrophes. An audit, a client complaint, unexpected tax complications. Even as the caller's voice remained neutral, her internal narrative painted each word with shades of anxiety. Clyde Reynolds, the high school basketball coach, approached communication differently. He had noticed a pattern in his interactions, how the energy of his initial assumption seemed to color every conversation before a single word was spoken. Before making challenging phone calls about team selections or performance discussions, he began a curious experiment. "People are glad to hear from me," he would whisper to himself, taking a deep breath before dialing. The subtle shift was almost imperceptible, yet it transformed the tenor of his conversations. Parents who might have been defensive became collaborative. Players who could have been discouraged felt supported. The realm of assumption operated like an invisible filter, more powerful than conscious intention. Beneath the carefully crafted affirmations and positive thinking techniques lay a deeper, more persistent layer of belief, a set of unquestioned narratives that served as standing instructions to the universe. Hazel's assumptions about communication created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her anticipation of negative outcomes subtly shifted her tone, her listening, her interpretation. Each call became a potential threat, driving away opportunities before they could fully materialize. Clyde's experiment revealed something profound. Assumptions were not passive experiences, but active creators of reality. They were the quiet background music that set the emotional tone of every interaction, every opportunity, every potential transformation. Practice. Complete these sentences honestly. Life always. People usually. Money tends to. Then write one new assumption you are willing to practice. Choose carefully. This is not about positive thinking, but about consciously selecting the underlying narrative that will shape your experiences. Repeat this new assumption softly several times each day, as if you are installing a new operational system in your inner world. Chapter 7. The Spell of Not Yet. Irene Thompson stood behind the gleaming kitchen counter, her fingers dusted with flour, surrounded by intricate cake decorating tools that remained mostly untouched. Years of potential sparkled in those pristine implements: professional piping bags, delicate sugarcraft tools, and a collection of cookbooks that whispered of unexplored culinary dreams. Her friends knew her as the most talented baker in their small community, someone whose cakes could transform any ordinary celebration into a memorable event. Yet Irene's online bakery business existed only in her imagination, perpetually trapped in a limbo of someday. "Things are just too busy right now," she would say, picking up an extra shift at the local cafe or helping a colleague cover their weekend work. Each "not yet" became another layer of invisible frosting, sealing her dreams behind a protective glaze of perpetual preparation. Roy Martinez understood something different about timing. As a postal worker with a passion for urban photography, he recognized that waiting for perfect conditions was its own form of surrender. Where Irene saw obstacles, Roy saw opportunities. When his photography side project first emerged, Roy didn't wait for professional equipment or the ideal lighting. He started with his smartphone, capturing street scenes during lunch breaks and after work. Each imperfect image was a declaration, a commitment to his craft that no amount of planning could replace. The law of arrival understood a fundamental truth. Desires don't wait for perfect conditions. They respond to commitment, to the energy of now. Attaching endless conditions to dreams, when I have more money, when I'm more prepared, was essentially instructing the universe to keep those dreams perpetually suspended. Irene's not yet was more than procrastination. It was a protective mechanism, a way to avoid the vulnerability of actually trying. Each postponement was a silent agreement with her fears, a negotiation that kept her potential safely locked away. Roy's approach demonstrated a different philosophy. By taking imperfect action, he created momentum. Each photograph, each small step, was an invitation to possibility. The universe responded not to perfect plans, but to genuine movement. Practice. Pick one dream you have benched with, not yet. List the conditions you've attached to this dream. Circle at least one action you can take within the next 24 hours that honors the dream in its current, imperfect phase. Chapter 8. Signs, Synchronicities, and Subtle Invitations. Alma Rodriguez's fingers hovered over her computer keyboard at the hospital reception desk, her gaze drifting momentarily to the parking lot. Another California license plate caught her eye, the third one today, featuring a subtle reference to Sacramento. Earlier that morning, a patient's intake form had listed Sacramento as a previous address. During her lunch break, a morning news segment about urban development had focused on the same city. Now, this third occurrence felt different. No longer just a coincidence, these repeated references seemed to whisper something more profound. She had been privately contemplating a move, feeling increasingly disconnected from her current city. The hospital job paid well, but something inside her yearned for change, for a landscape beyond the familiar walls and routine interactions. Synchronicities, the core teachings suggested, were not mystical commands, but gentle invitations. They represented a subtle dialogue between inner readiness and external possibility. They emerged when an individual hovered near a personal threshold, signaling potential paths without demanding absolute commitment. Vernon Hartley understood this lesson differently. As a seasoned engineering project manager, he had consistently dismissed recurring patterns as mere coincidence. When subtle warning signs appeared, repeated equipment malfunction reports, team communication breakdowns, unexplained data inconsistencies, he attributed them to normal operational noise. His most significant project, a complex infrastructure redesign, ultimately collapsed spectacularly. Only in retrospect did Vernon recognize the numerous signals he had systematically ignored. Each dismissed warning had been a soft nudge toward necessary intervention, a chance to course-correct before total system failure. The universe, it seemed, communicated through patterns, not thunderbolts. Genuine guidance arrived as a gentle, persistent rhythm, not as fear-driven superstition, but as an alignment between inner intuition and external circumstances. Signs and synchronicities demanded discernment. They required an individual to distinguish between paranoid interpretation and authentic guidance. The key was maintaining inner peace, staying connected to personal values while remaining open to unexpected nudges. Practice. For the next 7 days, maintain a simple log of signs and meaningful coincidences you encounter. At the end of the week, sit quietly in a comfortable space. Ask yourself, if these were a conversation, what would they be nudging me toward? Write your most intuitive answer without overthinking. Trust the first impressions that emerge. Chapter 9. Closing Old Doors. Sylvia Matthews sat in her dimly lit apartment, the soft glow of her smartphone illuminating her weary face. Midnight had long passed, yet she continued scrolling through Alex's social media, her ex-partner's carefully curated digital life. Each swipe was a painful ritual, a self-inflicted wound she simultaneously wanted to heal and keep open. She had told her friends she was ready for new love. She had even gone on a few dates. But here she was, anchored to a relationship that had ended months ago, her emotional doorway propped open by unresolved feelings and digital memories. The universe observes such moments with quiet patience. Every lingering attachment is an invisible barrier, a half-closed door that prevents new experiences from entering. Closure wasn't about erasing memories or pretending the past didn't matter. It was about blessing what was completed, about acknowledging the journey's lessons and releasing its energy. Gerald Reynolds understood this principle differently. A seasoned salesman, he had maintained a relationship with a problematic client for years, tolerating late payments, constant demands, and persistent disrespect. The account represented financial security, or so he believed. Fear of losing the known had kept him tethered to a relationship that drained more than it provided. When Gerald finally mustered the courage to terminate the contract, something unexpected happened. Within weeks, a more aligned client approached him, one who respected his work, paid promptly, and offered a significantly higher compensation package. The act of closing one door didn't create emptiness. It created space. Space for new possibilities, for more resonant connections, for energy to flow toward more meaningful opportunities. Every unresolved connection, be it a relationship, a professional engagement, an old grudge, or an outdated identity, acts like an emotional anchor. These half-open doors consume psychic energy, preventing full engagement with present possibilities. Closure was not about forgetting. It was about completion, about recognizing that every experience has served its purpose, that every relationship has taught its lessons, and that gratitude, not resentment, was the most powerful release mechanism. Practice. Choose one door in your life to close. This might be, accompany this physical act with a spoken blessing. Thank what was for its lessons, declare its purpose fulfilled, and consciously open yourself to what comes next. Chapter 10. The First Oath at the Gate. Leonard Thompson stood at the threshold of the conference room, his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed the leadership contract. The role of Senior Program Director at the city's largest social services network represented everything he had worked toward for a decade. Yet something deeper than professional ambition stirred within him. He recognized, with startling clarity, that this promotion demanded more than a new job title. It required a fundamental reimagining of how he approached his work, his energy, and his personal boundaries. Leonard had always been the person who said yes to every request, who worked late into the night, who absorbed the emotional labor of every struggling client and colleague. This new role would collapse if he maintained his current pattern of overcommitment. The invitation before him was not just professional, it was transformational. To truly step into this leadership position, he would need to make an inner oath, a sacred promise about how he would conserve, direct, and honor his energy. Mabel Rodriguez understood this principle intuitively in her own journey. As a freelance writer struggling to be taken seriously, she began treating her craft with professional reverence, long before major opportunities arrived. She set strict writing hours, invested in quality equipment, and spoke about her work with the confidence of an established author, even when her primary audience was her home office wall. The universe, it seemed, responded to the quality of one's internal commitment. Mabel's oath to herself, to show up as a professional writer, regardless of current external validation, began attracting more substantial writing assignments. Clients sensed her refined energy, her uncompromising dedication. Leonard realized that his new role required a similar inner transformation. He would need to become someone who protected his energy, who delegated effectively, who understood that leadership was about strategic focus rather than constant martyrdom. The inner oath was more than a mental exercise. It was a vibrational reset, a deliberate recalibration of how one moves through the world, how one speaks, thinks, and ultimately manifests. Practice. Choose one area where you desire an upgrade. Write a short oath at the gate, describing how you will carry yourself inside that new reality. Then read it aloud, as if you were crossing an invisible line, letting the words mark a real change in how you move. Part 2. Walking the Hidden Path. Chapter 11. Mapping Your Thresholds. Pauline Matthews stared at the job application, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the submit button. The position at Riverside Medical Center offered precisely what she had been seeking for years. Flexible daytime hours that would allow her to be present for her 2 children while maintaining a stable career in medical administration. Yet something familiar stirred within her. That same old hesitation, a protective instinct that had become more of a prison than a shield. She recognized the pattern now. Every time an opportunity emerged that could genuinely transform her circumstances, she would find a reason to retreat. Her hands began to tremble, a physiological response she had come to know intimately. Each time change approached, her body would tense, her breath would shallow, and her mind would construct elaborate narratives of potential failure. Across town, Ed Rodriguez sat in his small studio apartment, surrounded by half-finished musical compositions and photographs of bands he had once been part of. He was beginning to see the architecture of his own recurring pattern, always leaving musical projects right before they could crystallize into something meaningful. Both Pauline and Ed were experiencing what might be called threshold anxiety, a deeply ingrained response to potential transformation. Their lives had become a series of almost moments, where change hovered tantalizingly close, but never fully materialized. For Pauline, this meant job applications withdrawn, potential relationships abandoned, and opportunities consistently left unexplored. For Ed, it meant musical collaborations dissolved just before recording, creative momentum perpetually interrupted. These weren't random occurrences, but deliberate, unconscious strategies of self-protection. Each near miss was actually a carefully constructed mechanism to maintain a familiar, albeit uncomfortable, status quo. The universe, they were learning, doesn't just randomly present opportunities. It persistently brings individuals back to the same thresholds, offering repeated chances to make a different choice, to step through a door previously left unopened. Their patterns were not punishments, but invitations, maps carefully drawn by their own souls, highlighting exactly where growth was most needed. Practice. Draw a simple diagram of your life's recurring thresholds and write one new response you are willing to make at each. Treating this as a living map, you can return to whenever you feel back at the same place again. Chapter 12. The Identities That Cannot Cross. Harold Reynolds sat in his corner cubicle, surrounded by stacks of financial reports and spreadsheets, his body rigid with a familiar tension. For 15 years, he had repeated the same mantra to himself and anyone who would listen. I'm just not the type who takes risks. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on his meticulously organized workspace. Tucked away in a drawer, hidden beneath performance reviews and tax documents, lay a yoga mat, a forgotten dream that had collected dust for years. Every lunch break, Harold would scroll through social media, watching, yoga instructors sharing their passion, their bodies moving with grace and intention. He'd feel a stirring deep within, quickly suppressed by his well-rehearsed narrative of limitation. Accountants don't become yoga teachers, he would tell himself. I'm too practical, too structured. These identity statements were more than just words. They were invisible walls, carefully constructed to keep him precisely where he believed he belonged, safe, predictable, unfulfilled. Across town, June Millbrook was experiencing a different relationship with her own identity. At 68, she had spent decades defining herself through familial roles: wife, mother, grandmother. But something had shifted recently. I'm no longer too old to start, she declared to herself one morning, signing up for a local art class. Her hands, which had spent years cooking meals and mending clothes, now tentatively held paintbrushes. With each stroke, a new identity began to take root. The universe, ever responsive to internal shifts, began sending June opportunities. A local gallery needed volunteer docents. An art supply store offered senior discounts for classes. Small invitations appeared, aligning with her emerging sense of self. Harold and June represented two profound approaches to personal identity. One remained trapped by self-imposed limitations, while the other consciously chose to rewrite her story. Practice. List 2 identities that cannot cross into the life you are choosing, and 2 that can. Then write a short retirement note to the old identities and a welcome note to the new, reading both aloud as a way of shifting your inner casting. Chapter 13. Time Delay and Divine Timing. Lo Martinez stood at the mailbox, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the envelope from the nursing school. 2 previous rejection letters had taught him to temper his expectations, but something felt different this time. As he read the acceptance letter, a cascade of unexpected realizations washed over him. His elderly father, who had been struggling with increasing medical needs, would now qualify for in-home care through a new state program. The timing was impossibly perfect, a choreography of circumstances he could never have planned himself. For years, Lou had wanted to become a nurse, but family obligations and financial constraints had always seemed to create invisible barriers. Each rejection had felt like a personal failure, a sign that his dream was impossible. Now, he understood something profound about the nature of timing and arrival. The universe, he realized, wasn't simply responding to his desires. It was orchestrating a complex dance of readiness, aligning not just his personal preparedness, but the broader ecosystem of support, opportunity, and protection. Across town, Betty Collins reflected on her romantic history. A decade of relationships that had once felt like failures now revealed themselves as intricate lessons. Each partnership had shaped her, stripped away illusions, and refined her understanding of herself and love. The partners who had come and gone were not mistakes, but sculptors. They had chiseled away her defensiveness, taught her boundaries, and helped her grow into the woman who could now recognize and appreciate a truly aligned relationship. Her perspective shifted from seeing time as an enemy to recognizing it as a collaborator. The delays weren't punishments, but preparations. Practice. Choose one delayed desire. Write down at least 3 ways the extra time might be serving your growth or safety. Create a simple phrase such as, "I bless the timing of this," and repeat it whenever impatience arises. Chapter 14. Letting Go as Sacred Physics. Norma Anderson stared at the storage unit, its metal door groaning under the weight of accumulated memories. Cardboard boxes balanced precariously, filled with furniture from 3 past apartments, clothing from different versions of herself, and artifacts of dreams half forgotten. Each month, she wrote a check for $175, money that could have gone toward a better living situation, yet she held on to these possessions out of a deep-seated fear of lack. When she finally hired a donation service and released 80% of the unit's contents, something remarkable happened. Her body felt lighter. The tension between her shoulder blades, a chronic ache she'd attributed to work stress, simply dissolved. Within weeks, she discovered a charming studio apartment that cost less than her storage unit rental and previous rent combined. The universe, she realized, operated on an intricate, energetic economy. Holding on to things, whether physical objects, past narratives, or emotional baggage, consumed precious bandwidth. Every item stored was an unacknowledged weight, blocking the arrival of new possibilities. Across town, Dean Richardson had his own release journey. For months after his breakup, he compulsively checked his ex-partner's social media, spending hours analyzing posts, interpreting subtle changes, keeping himself tethered to a relationship that no longer existed. When he finally deleted the social media apps and redirected that time into learning web development, something shifted. The energy he had been hemorrhaging into digital stalking now fueled a new skill. Within 3 months, he had completed an online certification and received his first freelance coding contract. Both Norma and Dean discovered a fundamental truth. Letting go was not just an emotional act, but an energetic recalibration. Every attachment, whether to objects, memories, or past narratives, occupied real psychological and emotional space. Practice. Identify one thing you are gripping, a belief, object, or relationship dynamic. Write what you fear would happen if you let go, and then take a small symbolic action of release while affirming, I am making room for what truly belongs. Chapter 15. Receiving without flinching. Ruth Jensen's hands trembled slightly as her sister Maria slid an envelope across the kitchen table. It's to help with Dad's medical bills, Maria said softly. Ruth's immediate response was a reflexive shake of her head. No, I can manage. Her body had learned this dance decades ago. A childhood of unpredictable love, where help always came with invisible strings. Compliments made her uncomfortable. At the nursing home where she worked, when her supervisor praised her exceptional patient care, Ruth would immediately deflect. I'm just doing my job, she'd mumble, her shoulders hunching slightly. Even shared meals became a battlefield of independence. She'd insist on splitting every check, arguing down to the last dollar, her nervous system perpetually braced against the possibility of obligation or vulnerability. A deeper pattern lived beneath her actions, a survival mechanism learned in childhood, where love felt transactional, where receiving meant potential manipulation or loss of autonomy. Her body had become a fortress, reflexively pushing away anything that looked like unconditional support. Across town, Floyd Markham was learning a different language. A widower of 3 years, he had initially responded to neighborhood kindnesses with elaborate protests. When neighbors brought casseroles after his wife's passing, he'd argue, deflect, or attempt to return dishes immediately. But something had shifted. Now, when a casserole arrived, Floyd would pause. He'd look the neighbor in the eye and simply say, "Thank you." No explanations, no arguments, just genuine appreciation. Slowly, his world began to soften. Neighbors lingered longer. Conversations became warmer. Support began to feel less like an intrusion and more like a natural exchange of human kindness. Practice. Commit to graciously accepting 3 offers of help, kindness, or praise over the coming days. Each time an offer arrives, simply say, "Thank you," and nothing more. Afterward, write down the sensations that arise in your body, the tension, the discomfort, the potential moments of ease. Notice how your nervous system responds to receiving without shrinking or deflecting. Chapter 16. The Language of the Ready. Clara Martinez's words hung in the air like a persistent fog. "I'm always broke," she would joke to her co-workers, punctuating each customer service call with a self-deprecating laugh. "Just my luck, right?" Her language was a subtle incantation, a repetitive spell she cast unknowingly. Unexpected bills would arrive just when she claimed she had no money. Her car would develop mysterious problems right after she mentioned being unlucky. Sleepless nights followed her constant declarations of exhaustion. The universe, it seemed, was an obedient listener. Each casual complaint became a blueprint for her reality. Ralph Thompson's world operated differently. A bus driver for 15 years, he had once been the king of workplace negativity. "Here we go again," was his standard morning greeting. Each route felt like a burden, each passenger a potential challenge. Then something shifted. Ralph began to intentionally reframe his language. "Let's see what good shows up today," became his new morning mantra. The subtle change wasn't about toxic positivity or denying challenges, but about opening a window for possibility. His bus routes gradually transformed. Passengers seemed friendlier. Traffic flowed more smoothly. Small, unexpected moments of kindness began to pepper his days. A passenger helping an elderly rider, a child sharing a genuine smile, a co-worker bringing unexpected coffee. Language, Clara and Ralph were learning, was more than mere communication. It was a creative force, quietly programming their internal and external experiences. For Clara and Ralph, words were no longer just sounds. They were seeds, carefully planted in the soil of consciousness, growing precisely the reality they described. The chapter beckoned readers to examine their own verbal landscape, not to force positivity, but to become intentional architects of their spoken world. Chapter 17. Embodying the Arrived Self. Millie Henderson stood in front of her bathroom mirror, her temporary employment badge still clipped to her worn blazer. She had dreamed of becoming a respected therapist for years, yet her current reality told a different story. Her workspace remained cluttered with random administrative paperwork. Her business card still read administrative assistant, despite her ongoing counseling certification. Her daily habits betrayed her deeper aspiration. She scheduled her own life around her temp job, leaving her graduate studies and therapy training as an afterthought. When colleagues asked about her career, she would mumble something about working on something, rather than confidently declaring her professional trajectory. Across town, Gus Rodriguez was experiencing a parallel transformation. An aspiring musician who had previously treated his craft as a weekend hobby, he now approached his musical journey with deliberate intention. He began blocking specific hours each day for rehearsal, treating music not as a distant dream, but as his current profession. When introducing himself at local venues, Gus started saying, "I'm a musician," instead of, "I'm trying to be a musician." He organized his living space to reflect his commitment, creating a dedicated music corner with his instruments prominently displayed. His email signature changed to include musician before any other descriptor. The subtle shift in language and behavior began attracting different opportunities. Local venue owners started seeing him as a serious artist. Fellow musicians began approaching him with collaboration proposals. His energy of congruence, where his internal identity matched his external presentation, was creating a magnetic field of professional recognition. For Millie and Gus, the journey wasn't about pretending, but about practicing the identity they desired until it became their natural state. Their transformations illustrated a profound principle. Embodiment precedes external validation. The practice would invite readers to write a detailed snapshot of their arrived self's day, selecting 3 specific behaviors to implement immediately, treating them as sacred commitments to their emerging identity. Chapter 18. Doubt at the Door. Opal. Jenkins stared at the envelope from the Westfield Graduate Institute, her hands trembling slightly. The acceptance letter gleamed with an official seal, announcing her admission to a competitive psychology research program. She had applied months ago during a moment of spontaneous courage, never truly believing she would be selected. As she read the letter, a familiar whisper began in her mind. "They must have made a mistake," she muttered, her fingers tracing the letterhead. The doubt crept in like a persistent shadow, questioning her worthiness, her capabilities, her very right to occupy this opportunity. Her immediate impulse was to draft a polite declination. She could already imagine the scenarios. Perhaps they had confused her application with someone else's, or maybe this was some administrative error. The doubt spoke in a voice that sounded remarkably like her mother's, cautious, protective, risk-averse. Meanwhile, Earl Thompson sat in his small home office, a notebook open before him. He was preparing to launch a digital marketing consultancy, a dream he had nurtured for years. Instead of letting fear paralyze him, he had decided to engage with his doubts systematically. On the page, he began listing every anxious thought. "I don't have enough experience. What if I fail? What will my family think?" Beside each doubt, he methodically wrote a calm, rational response. "I have successfully managed 5 client projects already. Failure is a learning opportunity, and I have savings to support me. My family wants me to be happy and fulfilled." Earl's approach transformed his anxiety. By acknowledging each fear and providing a concrete counterargument, he was converting emotional turbulence into strategic preparation. The doubts didn't disappear, but they lost their paralyzing power. For Opal and Earl, doubt revealed itself not as an enemy, but as a natural threshold guardian, a final checkpoint asking, "Are you truly ready to step forward?" The core teaching emerged. Doubt is not a stop sign, but an invitation to clarify one's commitment and capability. The practice would guide readers to engage with their own doubts deliberately, creating a structured dialogue between fear and intention. Chapter 19. Transmuting Waiting into Preparation. Alma Jean Harrison sat in her small apartment, the glow of her smartphone illuminating her frustrated expression. Night after night, she scrolled through job postings and social media, sighing dramatically about her stalled career in marketing. Her dream of becoming a creative director seemed perpetually out of reach, yet she made no meaningful moves to bridge the gap between her current reality and her desired future. Her resume remained untouched for months, collecting digital dust. Online courses she had bookmarked went unstarted. Professional networking events came and went without her participation. Instead, Alma Jean perfected the art of passive waiting, a posture that communicated to the universe a fundamental disbelief in her own potential. Across town, Walter Dean approached life differently. After years of unsuccessful dating and romantic disappointment, he decided to shift his energy. Rather than obsessively counting the days until he would meet his ideal partner, he began preparing himself and his living space for a meaningful relationship. Walter cleaned out his spare bedroom, creating space both physically and energetically. He started attending community cooking classes, expanding his social skills and personal interests. He invested in therapy to understand his relationship patterns and heal old wounds. His preparation wasn't a desperate chase, but a calm, intentional cultivation of readiness. The core teaching emerged. Preparation is not about forcing outcomes, but about becoming a vibrational match for the experiences you desire. It's the difference between waiting and becoming. For Alma-Jan, her waiting posture spoke volumes. Each night of scrolling without action was a quiet declaration to the universe that she didn't truly believe in her own possibility. Her complaints were more comfortable than her potential. Walter's approach demonstrated a profound understanding of readiness. By focusing on personal growth and creating space for connection, he transformed his energy. Conversations began to flow more naturally. Unexpected encounters started to occur. His preparation wasn't a guarantee, but it was an invitation. The chapter's practice would guide readers to convert their own waiting into purposeful preparation. Choose an area of longing. List 3 concrete preparation steps. Schedule them as acts of faith, tangible demonstrations of belief. Would Alma-Jan recognize the power of active preparation? Would Walter's approach yield the connection he sought? The universe listens not to wishes, but to readiness. Chapter 20. Daily Arrivals. In the bustling corporate offices of Meridian Solutions, Sadie Thompson moved through her days like a ghost, trapped between potential and resignation. Each morning she would wake up and immediately reach for her phone, scrolling through social media and news feeds that left her feeling depleted before her workday even began. Breakfast became an afterthought, sometimes a stale granola bar, sometimes nothing at all. At the office, Sadie's conversations rarely rose above workplace gossip. She would huddle with colleagues, dissecting the personal lives of their managers and teammates, a habit that felt like connection, but actually drained her professional energy. Her workdays became a series of small compromises, avoiding challenging projects, postponing important conversations, and convincing herself that someday, somehow, her big break would arrive. Clyde Ray approached life differently. A former insurance adjuster who had grown tired of his monotonous existence, he had begun implementing what he called his micro-arrival strategy. Each morning, he would wake up and make his bed with deliberate care. He'd prepare a nutritious breakfast, dress as though he were already in the role he aspired to occupy, and make conscious choices that reflected his desired future self. For Clyde, these weren't grand gestures, but intentional micro-thresholds. Drinking water instead of coffee. Choosing a book over mindless television. Sending a thoughtful message to a colleague instead of gossiping. Practicing 10 minutes of meditation. Each choice was a quiet rebellion against his previous patterns. Where Sadie saw her daily choices as inconsequential, Clyde understood them as training grounds. Every small decision was an opportunity to embody the energy of his future self. He wasn't waiting for a promotion or a dramatic life change. He was creating it, moment by moment, choice by choice. The core teaching emerged. Micro-thresholds are the invisible architecture of transformation. They are the daily moments where you repeatedly practice the frequency of the life you desire. Your smallest choices are not separate from your biggest dreams. They are the precise mechanism through which those dreams take shape. Practice. Designate one day as your day of micro-arrivals. Throughout the day, tally each small choice that reflects your new reality. At evening's end, review how those tiny acts made you feel, cementing the truth that big changes are built from consistent, small arrivals. Part 3. Standing at the Gate of Worlds. Mastery of Arrival. Chapter 21. Parallel Doors, Parallel Lives. Vernon Lee stood behind the checkout counter, restocking produce bags, his mind drifting through alternate universes. Years ago, an email had arrived, a scholarship opportunity that he had hesitated to answer, then ultimately ignored. Now, at 35, he found himself constantly aware of life's branching pathways. Each decision felt like a doorway, saying yes to an extra shift, choosing a different checkout line, responding to a colleague's comment with kindness instead of frustration. Vernon had begun to see these moments not as small choices, but as profound redirections of his entire existence. The grocery store became his laboratory of possibility. He watched how a simple smile to a customer could transform the entire energy of an interaction, how a moment of patience could open unexpected conversations, how choosing to listen instead of react could shift an entire encounter's trajectory. Nearby, his co-worker, Ida May, was experiencing her own revelation. For years, she had swallowed her thoughts, allowing resentment to build in silent rooms of unexpressed truth. But recently, she had started choosing differently, speaking up with compassion, sharing her perspective without aggression. Each time Ida May chose to speak her truth, she noticed something remarkable. The conversations that followed were not confrontations, but openings. Colleagues who seemed distant became collaborators. Misunderstandings dissolved into moments of genuine connection. Vernon observed this in her, the way her subtle choices created entirely new pathways of interaction. The hallways of possibility were always present, always adjacent, waiting for someone to choose a different door. The core teaching emerged. Life is not a linear path, but a complex network of doorways. Your current state, your beliefs, fears, assumptions, determines which door opens most readily. The universe does not judge your choices, but responds to them, routing you consistently toward experiences that match your internal frequency. Practice. Picture two doors related to a current situation in your life. On one side of a piece of paper, describe the life behind one door. On the other side, describe the life behind the alternative door. Then, take one concrete action that clearly belongs to the door you now consciously choose to walk through. Chapter 22. The Sacred Power of Decision. In a quiet suburban home, Agnes Lee surrounded herself with half-filled notebooks and scattered writing drafts. Years had passed with her book remaining an ethereal dream, always discussed, never committed. Her friends knew her as someone who wanted to write, but Agnes herself understood the profound difference between wanting and deciding. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. Agnes sat at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming across scattered papers, and felt a profound stillness enter her body. She wrote a single sentence in her most treasured notebook. "I will finish a draft this year." The moment felt different from her previous attempts. This wasn't a wish or a hope, but a clear, quiet declaration. Her body recognized the difference immediately, a sense of relief replacing years of anxious procrastination. Her schedule began subtly reorganizing. Morning hours previously spent scrolling social media now became writing time. Weekend plans adjusted to create space for her project. Across town, Erlene faced a similar internal transformation in her professional life. She had endured years in a draining corporate job, constantly complaining but never acting. Then one evening, she wrote a single sentence in her journal. "I am leaving this job and pursuing work that genuinely energizes me." The teaching emerged. True decisions are not loud or dramatic. They are quiet, firm commitments that immediately begin reshaping reality. Wanting whispers. Deciding speaks with a calm, unshakable voice. Erlene discovered that the moment she stopped negotiating with herself, opportunities began appearing. Networking connections became more meaningful. Potential job leads emerged. Her energy shifted from desperate searching to quiet expectancy. The law of arrival responds not to wishful thinking, but to clear, embodied decisions. When you truly decide, the universe stops presenting alternatives and starts supporting your chosen path. Practice. Choose one area of chronic indecision in your life. Write a simple, present tense decision statement. Then mark this decision with a tiny ritual, dating and signing it, placing it somewhere special or reading it aloud, so your body and mind recognize that a line has been drawn. Chapter 23. Arriving in Love, Wealth, and Purpose. Leonard James sat across from his therapist, a pattern slowly emerging that he had never before recognized. At his hospital job, he always volunteered for extra shifts. In his part-time tutoring work, he accepted students others had given up on. Even in his casual dating, he positioned himself as the problem solver, the rescuer, the person who could fix everything for everyone else. "I am here to solve other people's problems," he said quietly, the revelation landing like a weight. His therapist nodded, allowing the silence to expand. Leonard realized this single belief wasn't just a work strategy. It was a fundamental story he told about himself. In relationships, he attracted partners who needed rescuing. In his career, he took on roles that demanded constant sacrifice. His entire life was structured around being useful through solving others' challenges. The core teaching emerged. Our deepest beliefs about our worth create invisible structures that determine our experiences across multiple life domains. Leonard was not just working multiple jobs. He was enacting a comprehensive narrative of self-worth, defined entirely by external utility. Meanwhile, Bernice was undertaking a different journey. After years of proving her value through constant performance, she began practicing a radical acceptance. Her presence was inherently valuable, regardless of what she produced. This wasn't arrogance, but a profound understanding of her intrinsic worth. At work, something shifted. Colleagues who previously saw her as a workhorse began consulting her for strategic insights. In relationships, she attracted connections that appreciated her whole self, not just her capabilities. Her clarity about her contributions to the world became sharper, less reactive. The law of arrival revealed itself not as a magical manifestation, but as a responsive system that mirrors one's deepest beliefs about self-worth, safety, and contribution. Practice. Pick one of three realms: love, work, or personal purpose. Describe what arrived would look like there in simple language. Then choose one step, however small, that treats you as already deserving of that vision now, taking it as an act of alignment rather than a test. Chapter 24. Becoming a Threshold for Others. Martha Jean gripped the steering wheel of her city bus, her posture relaxed and her eyes warm as passengers boarded. For months, she had made a quiet internal commitment. Every person who stepped onto her bus would be met with genuine respect and kindness. At first, passengers seemed surprised. Her smile wasn't forced or performative, but deep and authentic. She greeted each rider by acknowledging their presence, a gentle nod, a sincere "good morning," a moment of eye contact that communicated, "I see you." Slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The regular commuters started changing. The elderly gentleman who usually hunched defensively began sitting straighter. The young college student, who habitually avoided interaction, started making small conversations. A group of construction workers who typically kept to themselves began helping each other find seats and holding the door for slower passengers. The core teaching revealed itself. Martha wasn't just driving a bus. She was holding a space of possibility. Her internal state, her genuine warmth and respect, was acting as a threshold through which others could glimpse a different way of being. Meanwhile, across town, Clyde Henry was experiencing a similar transformation in his workplace. As a manager, he had always believed control was the path to productivity. But recently, he had begun to see his role differently. Instead of micromanaging every detail, he started trusting his team's inherent potential. He stopped hovering over shoulders and started creating space for his employees to innovate. He asked open-ended questions. He listened more than he spoke. He celebrated attempts, not just successes. His team's energy shifted. Projects became more creative. Problem-solving emerged organically. People seemed more engaged, more willing to take thoughtful risks. Martha and Clyde were living examples of a profound principle. When you stabilize your own inner readiness, you naturally become a doorway through which others can glimpse new possibilities. By holding people in, your mind and heart, as already arriving, rather than broken or stuck, you create transformative spaces of potential. Practice. Choose one person or group in your life. Write a short description of their most empowered, arrived self. Over the next week, speak and interact with them, as if that version is already awakening, noticing how this affects both them and you. Chapter 25. Living as a Sacred Portal. Franklin Lee walked his postal route with a quiet, deliberate presence. Each morning, before stepping out into the world, he would pause and offer a simple prayer. Use me for good today. It wasn't a dramatic proclamation, just a quiet invitation to be of service. One crisp autumn morning, Franklin found himself lingering longer than usual at Mrs. Rodriguez's doorstep. Something in her eyes seemed heavy, and instead of his typical quick exchange, he asked how she was doing. She hesitated, then shared that she'd been struggling with overwhelming feelings of isolation and despair. Days later, Mrs. Rodriguez would tell him that their conversation had been a lifeline. That precise moment of connection had pulled her back from considering something drastic. Franklin hadn't known this. He had simply followed a gentle internal nudge to be present. The core teaching revealed itself slowly. Service isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about being open, listening, allowing yourself to be a conduit for something larger than yourself. Across town, Lila May experienced a similar phenomenon. A graphic designer by training, she began feeling creative nudges to record short encouragement messages. At first, she dismissed these impulses as strange. But gradually, she started recording brief, heartfelt audio clips, simple messages of hope, gentle reminders of inner strength. She posted these online, unsure who might hear them. To her surprise, the messages began resonating. People reached out, sharing how a particular recording had arrived exactly when they needed it most. Unexpected collaborations emerged. Opportunities appeared that she could never have planned or predicted. Both Franklin and Lila May were learning the same profound lesson. When you align yourself with love, clarity, and genuine service, you become a channel. The universe uses ordinary moments, quiet intentions, and seemingly insignificant actions as delivery systems for healing, comfort, and transformation. Their practice wasn't about forcing outcomes, but about remaining open, listening to subtle internal guidance, and trusting that their willingness to be a portal could create ripples far beyond their immediate perception. Practice. For 1 week, start each day with a simple invitation to be used as a channel for good. Follow at least one small inner nudge without overanalyzing it, and then reflect each evening on where you sense life may have moved through you. Chapter 26. The Collapse of the Old Story. The conversation was ordinary enough. Dolores sat with her friend Marina at their usual cafe, and as they sipped coffee, she began recounting her familiar narrative. "I'm always the one everyone leaves behind." But something felt different this time. The words that had once flowed so easily now caught in her throat, feeling suddenly foreign and uncomfortable. She stopped mid-sentence, surprised by her own reaction. The story she had told herself for years, about being perpetually abandoned, always the one left behind, suddenly seemed less like truth and more like an old, worn-out coat that no longer fit. Marina watched quietly, sensing something had shifted in her friend's energy. The core teaching emerged like a gentle revelation. Personal narratives are powerful instructions to the universe. The stories people tell about themselves become invisible blueprints, quietly directing life's experiences. Dolores had been unconsciously instructing the world to confirm her belief of being unlovable and disposable. Warren Lee understood this principle differently. A high school counselor who had experienced significant personal challenges, he began experimenting with reframing his life's narrative. Instead of emphasizing the hardships he had endured, he started highlighting moments of unexpected support, personal resilience, and unlikely blessings. When colleagues asked about his background, he no longer led with stories of struggle. Instead, he spoke about the unexpected mentors who had guided him, the inner strength he had discovered during difficult times, and the surprising ways life had supported his journey. What Warren noticed was remarkable. People's responses to him changed. Where they had once offered sympathy, they now showed genuine interest. Opportunities that seemed closed began to open. His changed narrative wasn't about denying past pain, but about refusing to let that pain define his entire existence. Dolores and Warren were discovering the same profound truth. Personal narratives are not fixed stories, but living, breathing scripts that can be rewritten. Practice. Write your current default story about your life in one paragraph. Then write a new paragraph that could also be true, but centers your strength and possibility, choosing to read the second one daily for a period as your new script. Chapter 27. Continuous Arrival. Gloria stood in her newly purchased home, surrounded by boxes and the weight of her long-held dream. She had believed that owning this house would be the final piece of security she'd been searching for her entire life. The down payment had nearly depleted her savings. The mortgage was a significant commitment, and yet she had imagined this moment would bring her complete peace. Instead, new anxieties cascaded around her like an unexpected rainstorm. The inspector's report mentioned potential foundation issues. The neighbor's fence seemed slightly askew, hinting at potential boundary disputes. Her carefully calculated budget now felt precarious with unexpected maintenance, costs looming. This wasn't the arrival she had imagined. It was another threshold, another beginning, not an end point. The core teaching emerged with crystal clarity. Life was not about reaching a final, perfect destination. Arrivals were not singular events, but continuous journeys of becoming. Each achievement, each milestone, was merely a doorway into another room of growth, another landscape of possibility. Howard Ray understood this principle intimately. A man in his mid-40s recovering from a decade of personal setbacks, he had learned to celebrate incremental progress. Where he once would have dismissed small victories, he now recognized each step as a meaningful arrival. A difficult conversation with his sister where he maintained healthy boundaries. An arrival, completing a work project without falling into old patterns of self-doubt. Another arrival, practicing meditation for 30 consecutive days. A profound arrival. By treating these moments as real achievements, Howard discovered something transformative. His appreciation kept him in a state of open readiness. Each celebrated breakthrough wasn't an endpoint, but an invitation for more growth, more connection, more understanding. Gloria and Howard were learning the same essential truth. Life was not about reaching a fixed destination, but about continuously arriving into deeper versions of themselves. Their journeys revealed that true security wasn't found in external achievements, but in the ability to move gracefully through life's constant transitions, to remain curious, adaptable, and open to growth. Practice. List 5 meaningful arrivals you have already experienced, however small, and create a simple ritual, lighting a candle, playing a song, or placing objects on a shelf, to honor them, training yourself to notice that you are already living inside answered intentions. Chapter 28. The Silent Chamber Before Creation. Nettie's world moved at the speed of emergency. As a senior project manager for a tech startup, her days blurred into a constant stream of meetings, emails, and rapid-fire decisions. Her productivity was legendary, until it wasn't. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Her usual strategies, color-coded spreadsheets, elaborate time blocking, back-to-back scheduling, suddenly felt like trying to hold water in a sieve. Exhaustion crept into her bones, and her once brilliant problem-solving skills began to fracture. One particularly chaotic Wednesday, she discovered the stairwell, not by design, but by pure accident. A forgotten email, a missed connection, and suddenly she found herself sitting on the cold concrete steps, completely disconnected from her usual frantic rhythm. 5 minutes of doing nothing. At first, it felt like rebellion. Then, something shifted. Ideas began to surface not through effort, but through stillness. Complex project roadblocks that had seemed insurmountable now appeared with surprising clarity. Solutions whispered rather than shouted. The silent chamber, she was learning, was not an absence of activity but a profound state of receptivity. It was a space where the law of arrival could communicate without the noise of constant mental chatter. Clarence's journey paralleled hers, though his battlefield was different. A marketing consultant prone to late-night anxiety spirals, he had become addicted to the numbing scroll of social media. Each night, he would lose hours to endless feeds, his mind racing with unresolved tensions and undefined fears. When he replaced those hours with 10 minutes of intentional stillness, simply sitting, breathing, allowing, something remarkable happened. His anxiety didn't just decrease, it transformed. Clarity emerged not as a forceful breakthrough, but as a gentle understanding. The silent chamber was teaching them both that arrival was not about pushing, but about creating space for wisdom to emerge. Practice. Designate a spot or posture as your personal silent chamber. Visit it daily for a short, consistent time with no agenda. Afterward, write any impressions or ideas that surfaced, treating them as subtle arrivals from a deeper part of you. Chapter 29. The Seal of Readiness. Virgie stared out her kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of herbal tea. The morning light caught the crystals hanging in her workspace, manifestation tools that had once represented hope, now feeling like relics of a different era. For years, she had oscillated between intense visualization practices and deep wells of frustration. Her wellness business had been a dream, perpetually hovering just beyond reach, a mirage that seemed to dance away each time she tried to grasp it. But something had changed, not with fanfare or dramatic revelation, but with a quiet, unshakable knowing. This morning was different. The thought emerged not as a desperate affirmation or a pleading wish, but as a simple statement of fact. This is happening. There was no energetic scrambling, no checking for signs, no urgent negotiation with the universe. Instead, a profound calm settled around her. She understood now that readiness wasn't about forcing or proving, but about a deep internal acceptance that required no external validation. Martin Lee was experiencing a similar phenomenon, though on a smaller scale. A long-standing conflict with his childhood friend had consumed significant mental and emotional energy. He had tried everything: mediation, detailed conversations, strategic apologies, but nothing seemed to shift the dynamic. Then he discovered the seal of readiness. Instead of continuing to analyze, strategize, or hope, Martin simply accepted the potential resolution. He stopped revisiting the conflict in his mind, stopped trying to manipulate the outcome. It was a subtle but profound energetic shift, moving from effortful, wanting, to quiet acceptance. Within weeks, an unexpected conversation emerged naturally. His friend reached out not through any orchestrated effort on Martin's part, but through what seemed like a spontaneous alignment of circumstances. The core teaching revealed itself. When readiness becomes a genuine internal state, external circumstances begin to reorganize with a fluidity that feels almost miraculous. It wasn't about controlling the outcome, but about creating an internal environment so aligned that the desired result could naturally emerge. Practice. Choose a simple, low-resistance desire. Sit with it until you can honestly say, "I accept this as part of my life." Then symbolically seal it, closing your journal, touching your heart, or exhaling deeply, while gently refusing to reopen the issue with anxious mental picking. Chapter 30. Carrying the door within. In the small, dusty town of Millbrook, Edith Matthews felt like a bird trapped in a cage of her own making. At 42, she had convinced herself that her circumstances were immovable. The aging family farm, the limited job market, the familiar streets that seemed to close in on her with each passing year. During a transformative coaching session, something shifted. Her coach gently guided her to recognize a profound truth. She had been waiting for external conditions to change before allowing herself to feel free. The revelation struck her like a sudden beam of sunlight through a clouded window. What if freedom wasn't about leaving, but about how she engaged with her current reality? Slowly, intentionally, Edith began to change her internal landscape. She started taking an online graphic design course, transforming her kitchen table into a learning space. She explored local cafes she'd previously ignored, striking up conversations with people she'd never noticed before. Her morning routine shifted from passive consumption to active exploration, reading books about design, sketching during her lunch breaks, treating her current job at the local agricultural supply store as a canvas for creativity. Something extraordinary happened. Her sense of possibility began to expand, not because her external circumstances had dramatically changed, but because her internal perception had transformed. Across town, Henry Joe was experiencing a similar awakening. Working as a maintenance technician at the local factory, he had long viewed his job as a dead-end position. But after a conversation with a mentor, he decided to reframe his perspective. Instead of seeing his current role as a limitation, he began treating it as a comprehensive training ground. He started documenting innovative repair techniques, suggesting efficiency improvements, and approaching each task with the mindset of a future operations manager. His attitude shifted from resignation to curiosity, from limitation to possibility. The chapter's core teaching illuminated a profound truth. The most powerful door is always within one's own awareness. Individuals never need to wait for perfect external conditions to begin living authentically. The door within represents the choice to interpret, respond, and imagine differently, right where one stands. The practice awaited, a simple yet powerful invitation to transformation. Conclusion. As the book neared its final pages, Edith Matthews sat by the window of her kitchen, the soft afternoon light casting shadows across her notebook. Her journey through the teachings of Arrival had been more than a mere reading experience. It was a profound transformation of her inner landscape. The practice of carrying the door within had subtly but powerfully reshaped her perception. Where she once saw limitations, she now recognized opportunities. Her online design course had become more than just a hobby. It was a pathway to understanding her own potential. The local cafe conversations, once intimidating, now felt like connections waiting to be discovered. Henry Joe's transformation at the factory mirrored her own. He had learned that readiness was not about waiting for the perfect moment, but about creating that moment through intention and perspective. His approach to work had shifted from mere maintenance to strategic improvement, revealing possibilities he had never before considered. The book had taught them both a fundamental truth. Reality arrives through a person as much as it arrives to them. Their thoughts, language, and daily choices were invitations to the unseen, silent messages to the universe about who they were becoming. As Edith traced her fingers along the book's final page, she understood this was not an endpoint, but a continuous journey. The practices were not techniques to master, but rhythms to integrate into her daily life. She would allow these insights to settle, to breathe life into her newfound understanding. The threshold she had crossed was real, yet always expanding, an invitation to continue walking, to continue arriving.
If you enjoyed this exclusive audiobook, I handpicked this next book which will change your life.